Shifting focus back to the Blue Jays. In the early going, what's maybe one thing that's really impressed you about this club and one thing that's maybe been a little bit concerning in the small sample size we've seen?
All right. So I'm going to say the same thing,
Okay.
pitching, for both what surprised me and what concerns me, right?
Yeah.
Uh, because look, yeah, I haven't checked it after the weekend, but they were a top three team in the American League in ERA. And I'm sure they're still in that range. You know, to expect them to have had a month like that from a pitching perspective, I don't think that was on anybody's bingo card.
Mhm.
So that's obviously the reason why they're in the position that they are, and they've also managed to put up those numbers despite a whole slate of injuries to pitchers up and down the roster. So that to me has been pretty impressive. At the same time, you know, they can't do this for the whole season,
Mhm.
right? They need some innings out of the rotation. So the fact that they're, been sort of running a, quasi 2 to 3 man rotation for a period of time, something that was, their off days allowed them to do. But, getting Ross Stripling back is going to help. And, if Ryu returns later this week, that'll certainly help and stabilize things. But part of the reason I think you're seeing so many of their pitchers end up on the injured list is like that bullpen is carrying too much of the load right now.
Mhm.
And you can do it for a small sample for a shortened period, but trying to do that over the course of 162 is just impossible. So that's got to correct, and they've got to get some more innings out of the rotation, or they're just going to destroy and shred the arms of the relievers who've done such a tremendous job to this point.
Yeah. And speaking of pitching there, I mean, in the offseason, all the talk was the Springer signings, the Semien signings, all the big name offensive players. But maybe an under the radar pickup was Steven Matz, who, didn't get a lot of fanfare, but you look at him, he's leading the team in wins, in strikeouts, in batting average against. So, you know, how much of this do you think, other than staying healthy, is him really turning the corner and is sustainable? Or do you think that this is just, again, flash in the pan and they really do need to still address that front of the rotation piece pitcher down the line, whether it's through trade or promotion from within the organization?
Well, there's a few things there. So let's start with this. Like this has always been within his band of capability, right?
Mhm.
He's had good years in the past. He's gotten away from that. He's had issues commanding his fastball. His sinker wasn't sinking, it was getting hit. So this was somebody who was in need of some tweaks, and you could reasonably expect a correction in performance. And Robbie Ray similar to that, right? So, I think that maybe didn't expect Robbie Ray to be quite as dominant as he's been, but he's a former All-Star, and he's certainly back to that type of form, which is really bodes well for the Blue Jays. Now, uh, you know, those two ads were great, and I think the reason they didn't get a lot of fanfare was because there was a significant element of risk there, right? You were buying a lot of volatility in the performance, and so far, the bets have proven to be very good ones. The Blue Jays made a bet on Kirby Yates, and that one didn't play out so well. So that's part of how it goes there. Same with Tanner Rourke last year, and having to designate him for assignment. I think the challenge is that there's just not enough of that kind of pitching,
Mhm.
right? So if you think, all right, Ryu, Matz, and Robbie Ray as a front three, all right, that's good, but you've got to get some significant innings out of the back in the rotation. So is Stripling going to emerge and go walk the rest of the way as a starter? Something that he's done in the past and been good, but he hasn't done it in a bit of time. So that's a bit of a question mark. The Blue Jays were hoping that Nate Pearson would emerge, and that hasn't happened yet. And now he's at AAA trying to find himself a bit. Thomas Hatch was certainly someone who was pushing himself onto the radar, but he's rebuilding and isn't going to be a factor in the near term. So, I think you look at it and there's definitely a hole there. At the same time, the Blue Jays have the opportunity to add. They're going to have the financial resources at a time where not a lot of teams want to carry money necessarily. They've got the prospect base from which to deal. So, they certainly have the ability to add midseason. I think at some point they're going to have to.
Hmm. And we see it all the time where, an AL pitcher will go to the NL and have a breakout season, but going the opposite direction doesn't always pan out, right? But you just mentioned it. He's clearly made some tweaks to his game there. Is there anything that you can point to as definitively saying, like, this is one area where Matz has really improved, and this is why we're finally seeing the results in a Blue Jays uniform as opposed to what was happening in New York for all those years?
Well, I mean, the fastball command and just not just sort of command, just strictly from a walk spaces, but just in terms of where he's placing his fastball, has been good. And the fastball has been a great pitch. And, everyone will talk about the complementary pieces, but, they had to get the fastball right.
Hmm.
And once you get the fastball right, then all of a sudden everything else comes into play for him. And, he was saying last year that he felt like that he had a little bit of uptick in velocity, and then maybe he started chasing velo a little bit, and that started disrupting his ability to spot the heater where he needs to. And instead of it sinking, it just ended up riding up and staying flat in the hittable parts of the zone, which is typically a pretty bad recipe. And he also had issue with his shoulder at one point, so there was maybe a health issue that was impacting him as well. So I think those are the pieces there. But the key thing, I think, from the Blue Jays perspective, and every pitching coach preaches this. Pete Walker is big on this, but make sure your fastball's right.
Hmm.
And if your fastball's right, then everything else typically falls into place. And they got the fastball right with him, and it's starting to pay some dividends.
Yeah. We just mentioned as well, too, Nate Pearson just got activated off the injured list. He's been designated for assignment at the alternating training site there. What do we have a timeline on when fans can sort of expect to see him making his big league debut in 2021 there, or is that still TBD at this point?
So it's been pretty interesting to hear the Blue Jays talking about Pearson, where it went from this guy's going to be back to he's competing for a job. And so right now, the results of these last couple outings at the alternate training site, didn't go really well. And it was more performance as opposed to stuff or health that was the issue. And so he has to get himself right. He has to be pitching the way that he's capable of pitching. At least that's the impression that the Blue Jays have given off about him. So, from a timeline perspective, this isn't anymore about building up or getting your pitch count up or whatever the case may be. This is really about him locking down performance and showing them that he's ready to be a part of it. Because the last thing that you want to do is take somebody who, try to, an uneven transition to the majors last year, and then throw them into the big leagues this year and say, hey, figure it out. They want them to because, for a couple of reasons. One, this isn't a developmental year for the team anymore, right? This is a win year. So they can't just can't just risk games with him saying, let him figure it out. And then, dumping that on the bullpen. And two, is just, he hasn't performed at that level yet. And, they want him performing really well when he comes to the big leagues, as opposed to trying to find something while he's in the big leagues.
Yeah. And with the emergence of some of the players like Ray and like Matz and all that, there's been a quiet murmurings from some of the fan base and some online, talking heads and whatnot of, well, does Pearson actually move to the bullpen or become sort of that middle innings reliever? Like, how would you manage him when he does make his debut? Just stay the course with the front of the rotation, or do you see him switching roles a little bit there?
Yeah, I mean, he's a starting pitcher. You've got to. There's absolutely no reason to not play that out. He's got three primary weapons that he can use really effectively. A fourth that is developing. There's I get the we want results right now feeling and the impatience, but the trajectory with young players is rarely uniform. And strictly upwards, right? You've got to ride it out a little bit. And, one of the reasons that the Blue Jays have talked so much about the depth is because it gives them the ability to ride this out. Their season isn't hinging on Nate Pearson. It shouldn't hinge on Nate Pearson.
Mm-hmm.
So, I understand the impatience and everybody's excitement, and you're like, oh, 100 out of the bullpen, that's going to play. But yeah, 100 out of the rotation plays a lot better. And that you have to think about the value proposition over the long term with Nate Pearson and what he brings. And he's got the potential to be an impact pitcher for a long, long time.
Yeah. And if we look at some of the other side of the ball there, as far as Blue Jays wonder kid prospects there, you've got three of them. Bichette and Vladdy are off to a blistering start. Biggio's kind of stumbling out of the gates a little bit, though. Is there anything that you've noticed that's changed from last year to this year? Or is this just early season, bump in the road and he'll get it sorted out?
Yeah, well, I mean, he's playing third base, and third base, people just aren't maybe recognizing how much of a challenge that is, and haven't really given him sort of any sort of fair sample of games to acclimate to that position. He played. I'm probably gonna screw up these numbers because I've got too many in my head. But it was roughly, I think, 45-ish games in the minor leagues at third base, and he's around 30 right now at the big league level. And those 45 games were scattered over several years in the minor leagues. So that's not a reasonable sample to expect a guy who's a solid defender but not a gifted defender to just acclimate to a position, especially at the big league level where balls are regularly coming at you in excess of 100 miles an hour, and you've got the shortest distance from bat to ball on the field, say for the pitcher. So I think that there's got to be some runway for him. There's got to be some opportunity for him to have some development and growing pains. And I know a lot of people like to pick on Kevin Biggio or find holes in his game, but I think he's really an underappreciated player. He brings a lot of elements that I think are really, really important to a winning club, and a lot has been asked of him. And he hasn't complained once. He's never put himself before the needs of the team, and that to me is the sign of a pretty special player.
Yeah. So patience is what fans need with Biggio, is what you're saying then.
Well, I think in general, I get it. It's easy to sort of lose track, and I think last year, to an extent, has skewed people's perceptions too, right? Because last year you're like almost 40% of the through 40% of the season at this point, right? It's everything matters. You're almost at 50%, and it's like every game counts. And now it's like, all right, let's just chill. There's still 5 more months of this, right? Like, this is one of 6. Let's breathe easy. There's a long, long time for things to correct.
Yeah. So obviously, Vladdy Jr. is leading the Jays in almost every statistical category at this point here. And, after 2 solid but unspectacular seasons at the major league level, he finally seems to be piecing it all together and living up to that potential that people knew was in him for all of these years. Other than his weight loss, is there anything you've noticed that he's doing differently, whether it's at the plate or defensively or anything that you can sort of say, all right, he's changed his approach or he's taking more balls or anything like that? Like, what have you noticed in his approach?
Well, I mean, you see the discipline and the control. I mean, he's walking more than he's striking out, which is obviously a tremendous feat, especially in today's game. But a lot of it is rooted within the weight and not the weight loss. And it's not just about being thinner. It's also making changes physically in order to increase his athleticness and to get him back to the athlete that he was. And he can just physically do a lot of things that he couldn't do in past years, just in terms of the way that he's swinging, the balance in his swing, the control of his body. Just from a stamina, he can carry a lot more work right now. And hitters take probably, I don't know, hundreds, 100 plus, 200 swings in a day leading up to a game and, maybe a bit afterwards. That takes a physical toll. And if you're not in a good physical space to deal with all that, to cope with that, then, it's going to catch up with you. And, even if you break down his swing from, say when the season opened last year in late July to when it finished at the end of September, like you can see a massive difference. And there's even more of a difference this year. It's under control. It's incredibly powerful. You see that lightning quick bat speed that carried him through. His hands are super fast. Pitchers just can't beat him right now. And a lot of times if he's going to make an out, it's because he's chased or he guessed at a wrong pitch. So that's what I see, and I think that's the difference. And he shortchanged himself a little bit. The past couple of years, he didn't give himself the full opportunity to be as successful as he can be. And I think he realized that. He took it upon himself, which is really important because it's coming from him as opposed to the team pushing him into it. And he's been accountable, and he's certainly reaping the benefits of that right now.
Yeah, small sample size, but I think we can rest assured that the people who are concerned that this weight loss would affect his power stroke can calm down a little bit then, eh?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that there's certain kind of weight, like there's good weight and there's bad weight, right? And he just lost bad weight. And like when he was ripping through the minor leagues, his body looked more like it does right now, right? It wasn't that, that weight was a big part of his success. Like the way it was for, say, a CC Sabathia or something like that. This is who he was, and he became something that he wasn't, and that took away from him.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to give you a Sophie's choice option here, and gun to your head, if you could only pick one of the three prospects. Well, I can't even say that they're prospects at this point here, but Biggio, Bichette, or Vladdy Jr. to build around for the next 15 years, and the other two have to leave, who are you picking out of those three?
It's funny. We have this conversation all the time. Like we had it a lot of the way, like who has the better career, Bichette versus Guerrero. I think offensively, Guerrero probably ends up the better player, but Bichette is going to give you more value defensively. As a middle infielder, even if he shifts to second base eventually, or whether or not he stays at shortstop. So he's going to give you a little bit more defensive value. So I probably take the two-way player, but it's really hard because Vladimir Guerrero Jr. could be a 5 to 6 win player just on the basis of his bat alone. That's how good an offensive player he is.
Yeah. Well, hopefully the Jays never have to make that decision there, but always fun to play the what if game. So,
definitely.
A lot of sports pundits had the Jays sort of pegged preseason as maybe a wild card team making the playoffs, whether they actually move on or not, up for debate. But with the small sort of sample size that you've seen, is that sort of where you see them landing this year, or are you moving them up or down a little bit based on early season results?
I thought that they were going to be a wild card team. They've got a little bit more pitching than I'd expect, but they've gone too far into their depth right now that that they have to correct some of their pitching, their issues in the rotation, or else that's gonna evaporate on them. So I still think that they've got a pretty good chance to be a wild card team. The league has been interesting in terms of the way that it started out. Obviously there's always a long way to go, but I expected Oakland to have fallen off a bit more than they have, and they just are always finding ways to be a good club. The Angels, I think, are going to be a factor this year. The Astros don't seem like they're going away. The Central is a little bit deeper as well now, with the White Sox and the Twins and Cleveland still hanging on. Kansas City being better than they've been. It's just a deeper league right now. There are fewer wins around it. So, I do think that they've got a pretty good shot at being a wild card team. And if the Yankees for some reason don't correct, or Stanton and Judge and they break down physically as they have so often, then all of a sudden this division opens up a little bit. So I do think there's the upside for more there, but I think wild card is a reasonable expectation for this team.
Yeah.